My name is Sally Bloomis-Dunn, and I'm a longtime member of the Hudson Valley Writer Center and Slappering Hole Press. I'm so happy to have you here with us today for this in-person reading with two incredible poets, Danny Lawless and Tom Sleigh. If this is your first time joining us for a reading, welcome. We hope you continue coming to our readings, classes, and events. And please check out our website for a complete list of offerings, including our classes on Zoom. We hope you will return to the Hudson Valley Writer Center in person as we welcome Rowan, Ricardo, Phillips, and Mary Jo Bang. It's going to be another great reading on Sunday, May 5th at 4 p.m. I want to thank the board, our teachers, and our students who are the beating heart of the center. We also want to recognize all the foundations and organizations who have supported us, including the Bydale Foundation, the David G. Taft Foundation, NISCA, Arts Westchester, and I also want to thank the Hudson Valley Writer Center staff. So I also wanted to thank Margot Stever, who is our founder and is in our audience, and we would not all be sitting here were it not for Margot. Margot, how many years ago? 83. Wow. It's amazing. Yeah, and this place was a shambles, right? Yeah, it's quite incredible. She and Don had such vision. Okay. It is a great honor to introduce Danny Lawless and his amazing second collection of poems, I Tell You This Now. Anyone who knows Danny knows that he is composed in equal parts of brilliance, kindness of heart, and modesty. I'm sure most of you are aware that besides being an amazing poet, Danny wears another hat as editor-in-chief of the monthly poetry journal Plume, which is about to release. Are you ready for this? It's 153rd issue. And it is one of the most highly regarded journals, I think, really on the planet. It's amazing what you've done with Plume, Danny. Now back to I Tell You This Now. I love the book's epigraph by Michael Ondaatje. Here's Ondaatje's quote. "We all have an old knot in our hearts we wish to untie." Having this quote as the door that opens I Tell You This Now makes these poems, which are filled with aching particular detail, feel that much more universal to the reader. Yes, indeed, we all have an old knot, or two, or three, or four, that we wish to untie. Structurally, there are no sections in the book, which gives no pre-planned releases from the reading of it, but instead allows the reader to choose their own places to stop and absorb the richness of all that has been said. There is a freedom in this that I treasure, and there is too the enhanced feeling of all the poems creating a very tightly integrated whole. I want to begin, and I hope you're going to read this poem, Danny, with the second poem in the book called Boyhood, which describes itself as a short poem with just enough room for the apple core I broke my front tooth on. The phrase just enough room here is an abstraction that we all often use as in, my mind is at peace tonight and I have room for thought. But in this case, the abstract room soon becomes closer to a concrete room when the poem continues, or maybe it's even a shed-sized poem. My point here is that this poem, this artistic creation, any poem of Danny's, it seems, feels as real in the world as the tangible objects that surround each of our lives. The material world and the metaphysical world are seamless in this book, which lends the poem an unusual incantatory power. These poems, too, are hugely skilled at deepening and creating a kind of double play from all that has been said earlier as a poem moves down the page. The paten, do you pronounce it paten or paten? Paten? Okay. The paten begins with an explanation of what a paten is, and I didn't know, P-A-T-E-N. The paten is an object described as a lidless, silent butler or somebody's grandmother's fancy candy dish. The idea of the silent butler becomes that much more powerful when the reader learns of the silence that surrounds the sexual abuse implied at the poem's end. And for true language lovers, there are an ample handful of poems that delve brilliantly into word origin and association, as well as the range of a word's musical possibilities. One of my favorites among these is a poem called Aglet. Am I saying that right? Oh, good. 2 for 2, which offers too a wonderful portrait of the poet's father, a cabbie who gave his children a nightly vocabulary quiz while smoking a pipe with a drop of spittle trickling the length of its lacquered stem. I just love the music of that line. And throughout the book, and you'll see in my introduction, there are a lot of ands because there's so much. It was really hard to know what to choose to say about your book, Danny, because it's just so incredible. I was corresponding this morning, little aside, with the poet Nin Andrews, and she said, this book is going to win major awards. And I really believe that that's the case. I think it's stellar. So, and throughout the book, there are the poet's startling images. Here is one from a poem called Etched Pewter Bird, another favorite of mine, which is about the death of the speaker's best friend. And my heart, oh, my stunned heart, on its cupola of ribs, is cold now as your weather vane double, nameless, hollow, not hawk or sparrow. And the poem, Since You Died, M, Untethered, is both a stunning elegy and a pressing on language to find just the right word. Samuel Taylor Coleridge defined poetry as best words, best order. That finding of just the right word is the standard that the poems in this book certainly fulfill. But I am citing this quote relative to this poem, both for the rethinking of word choice, where the poet revises the word untethered to describe his deep grief, to the word unhinged, but also to draw your attention to another of Danny's amazing metaphors. This is how he describes his lasting state of grief. Or maybe unhinged, not crazy, but think of a door, the one the hurricane kicked in, how it never swung right after. I love that. And the title poem, I Tell You This Now, Tom, Because You Are Dead, is a tour de force. I'll give you just one line. I tell you this now, Tom, because you are dead, because speaking to the flawed dead who are perfect now is easy. And there too are funny poems. One of my favorites, which I'm hoping Danny will read, is The Arts of Love, which begins with the speaker stopping at a roadside stand to look at some tools laid out on a table sold by a local farmer. And then the poem winds up with his beloved in black panties and a Betty Page bra. Quite a range in these poems. Tools, anyway. The series of elegies about the speaker's sister at the end of the book are both heartbreaking and stunning. I reread the poem Rose many times. In it, he illustrates the madness of his sister through a description of a beetle. And then the poem moves up to the stars and then ends by recognizing the limits of language. The rose, which only words far from roads can describe. Danny's poems follow this maxim to a T, just close enough and just far enough away to perfectly describe whatever subject he has taken into hand. Well, enough from me. You're sure to enjoy. Please welcome Danny Lawless reading from his second book, I Tell You This Now.
Here, I'll set my time here. So, Sally, I feel like I should just stop right now. It's all going to go downhill from there. Really, it can't get any better than that. So, thank you. That was just wonderful. Thank you. And Margot, thank you for this and for everyone for coming today. It's very nice of you. As you say, as Sally said, it's not, first of all, these poems are not that good. They are not that good. And I'm not, yeah. It is, the book isn't in sections, but it does kind of function around maybe elegies and my childhood part of it, and a couple of other things. And so I'll keep to my time here because I know you, the real star of the show here is Tom. So, oh, I didn't. Oh, for this, yes. Sorry. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Soft-spoken. I've heard that many times. But Tom was the star of the show here, so I'll keep my time here. And the first one is, in fact, kind of appropriate because we just had an eclipse, and we saw some of it down in St. Petersburg, Florida, which is where we're from, or living now anyway. And it's called Family Photograph, My Brother, Solar Eclipse 1965, harking back to one that's quite some time ago. The only thing you need to know about it's I was fishing through, all of my family had died, and we got the house ready to sell, and I was looking through a box of photographs and came upon this photograph of my brother, and he was diagnosed, as were my other two siblings, with schizophrenia, unfortunately, right at puberty, each one at 14 or so. And this one is for my older brother. And ECT is electroshock therapy. So it's the only thing you just know. In a year, Haldol, ECT, the closed gates of a sanatorium. But for now, how happy you were to be 11 and unconcerned for once with school, the Cubs who punched who, for a few minutes to be unlearned, to be taught a new world. Oh, distant boy, how marvelous it all must have been, to be turned into a ghoul with your friends, to spurn the murmur of grown-ups with their highballs and hair on the deck, for a lowering sky burnt sepia orange. At 3 o'clock, to feel yourself disappear inside yourself, to cast no shadow. And so long ago now, how did you put it? The delicious, insistent thought, what if it stays like this? To yearn and yet to know, yet not to know yet what that yearning meant. Yes. And boyhood, there you go. There's my, not an unhappy boyhood at all, despite all the sort of family business as children often do. They are immune to parts of it, at least until much later, and they recollect these things that happen, I suppose. So this is boyhood. And now we come to the poem of the great mystery of the years 1957 to 1963. As you can see, it's a short poem with just enough room for the apple core I broke my front tooth on, one of Mary Kay Johnson's pigtails, an invisible photograph of my brother waving through the iron gates of a sanitarium. A King Egbert's cigar box of a poem, let's say, where emptied of its jackknife, centimes, and wax lips, a parakeet might face eternity, serenely nestled in a wad of Kleenex. Or maybe even a shed-sized poem, a dank, mysterious one with jars of rusted nails and coiled hoses behind the garden, where I like to pretend I was flying down a long Swiss mountain road on my father's flat-tired Schwinn, propped between two ancient suitcases. Yes, that's the ticket. A shed-sized poem, nails, hoses, my dad's cobwebbed bicycle, and I whistling through a missing incisor, ringing somewhere in the alpine years of the years 1957 to 1963, the bright silver bell of its title. So not a bad boyhood, I think, yes. The next one, this is the third and the last one, I think, of my childhood ones, yeah. In the South, I'm originally from Louisville, where I spent the first 30 years of my life. And we call them lightning bugs, not fireflies, which to us seemed very precious. And so we called them lightning bugs. And I remember each fall, I guess, or summer, they would come out, and that's what this is called, not fireflies. Not fireflies in the South, but plainer lightning bugs. Not as the poets would have it, you dears carrying your little lanterns behind you, green stars or the faulty strike of a match. Not as you once imagined the visiting souls of your dead parents. Only you, poor boy, lonely god of the backyard, and these flickering insects trapped in a juice glass, to be smeared between your fingers or tapped with a stick, set free with a magician's flourish, or according to your cold, your wondrous heart. I knew this was my wife would prompted me against that. Sorry, this is utterly typical. So, yeah. Let's see. This one is these are all pretty short, I hope. This one is about, that moment when you're in the doctor's office, and it was published in Journal of American Medicine. So, and I got a lot of responses. So apparently this is something that has happened to a lot of people, where you get a terrible diagnosis or one you weren't expecting, and then part of you is there present for that, and part of you is not there at all. You hear it and you don't hear it. You see the slides, you don't see them at all. So it's called Sleek Green Car. And maybe it'll ring a bell with, I hope not. And I hope that this doesn't ring that much of a bell with you. It's called Sleek Green Car. The usual vitals, follow-up labs, grainy screenshots of my aching back, until suddenly cancer. And like that, the doctor disappeared, taking with her 500 miles and almost 60 years. Again, summer, Louisville, our clapboard house on Rowland Street, the screen door ajar, the stifled cry of our new kitten Tim Tam, crushed beneath the wheels. It was like I'd been split in two. I, trembling, dazed, and for a moment I, the ponytailed young girl singing along to the radio in the sleek green car, who didn't see, who never heard. Do you want to hear the rest of the tethered one about my sister? Okay, this one's called, I'm not going to hear them all, that's for sure. Yeah. This one's called Since You Died, and my sister. Yes, we'll get to her in a bit, I suppose. But this was called Since You Died, M, Untethered. Since you died, M, untethered, maybe, is the metaphor I'm looking for. As in the bright orange leather ball swaying on the pole today in the park before some big kid smashed it too hard and sent it sailing into the parking lot. Or maybe the thin rope it hung from flayed at the end. Or maybe unhinged, not crazy, but think of a door, the one the hurricane kicked in, how it never swung right after. I'm talking grief, great rumbling red square tanks of it. Or maybe think of the grosbeaks gorging on the last of the sunflower seeds at your beloved feeder, the black fluster of wings before the hard crack, before the getting at the soft meat beneath. Yeah. It's a joy to read these poems, isn't it? It's just so upbeat. Yeah, you can. The title of my last book was a real party book, The Gun My Sister Killed Herself With. So it's yeah, it's good times. I won't read that one now. This is one called I haven't read this one before in a while. This is a part of the elegy ones, and it's about I'd gotten the news of a friend's passing, and I was on a train, and it's called "On the Way to Your Funeral, Already Sleep Deprived" was the title. On the way to your funeral, already sleep deprived, on the slow overnight train from Chicago to Altoona, after people had settled down, having hoisted their heavy bags onto the overhead rack and unfurled a magazine or unwrapped a tired muffin or iffy looking chicken salad sandwich, I heard somewhere a few rows up of kids swear, no, it was a real live corpse. Pretty funny, but an image that stayed with me all the way to Toledo. As I gazed at my haggard face through the window in the growing dark, were cows and trees and stop signs, and here and there an unmoored trailer floated by as if a dim river had overrun its banks, as if I were already thinking of them in the afterlife. Or maybe in a Zen or more theoretical physicist sense, as if when I let my brow fall against the cold glass, my own face disappearing, the cows and trees and stop signs and occasional double wide had become my thoughts alone, disembodied, drifting out from the Ohio countryside into the vast, unknowable universe. An image that inevitably vanished, as despite the grinding of the heavy wheels and the screeching of the air brakes, I took a little nap, then got up to massage my aching thighs and use the bathroom, which is pretty much where I'd like to leave you, Robert. Opening the thin little door with a majestic yawn to find everyone silently gathering their things in the half-lit car, the kids rubbing their eyes as you wipe your hands on a crisp white handkerchief. As the porter with his gleaming silver cart comes rattling down the aisle with his fresh Times for sale and his steaming croissant, the tiny bubbles of Perrier rising in their tinkling green bottles, and the voice on the loudspeaker announces, Altoona, next stop, Altoona, as if it were heaven itself, your hometown. And I'll read and see how much time I got, because Tom, we want to get to you for sure. So like 10 minutes. I think we're halfway home. So Etch Pewter Bird, what do you think? Sally, then you like that one? Okay. Etch Pewter Bird, yeah. Okay. This one, I'm sorry, terrible, isn't it? This is just even for the room, I'm quiet. Yeah, no, yeah, sorry. Terribly sorry. I'm working on it. Well, yeah, maybe not. Okay. This is one of the things, those poems where people, when you go to workshops, how do you get inspired by these things? And you know, those little birds, those little metal birds where the top comes off and there's half part in the wings, and then you take them off. People put little beads in them, maybe candy or something like that. I had heard this news, and I had a little bird on my desk, and so there you go. There's a poem right there. You know, it's called Etch Pewter Bird. So, and the first half of the poem is sort of dismissing this little bird here, and then he comes up and makes some sense toward the end. So, Etch Pewter Bird, you who are empty and so neither desire the expensive organic feed mix or require the attentions of the fastidious vet, who do not cheep so psychotically cheerfully that sometimes I want to throttle you. You who do not retreat coyly from my outstretched hand or tremble wildly if I hold you, who never once perched spitefully in the branches of the thorny locust tree behind the garage after I left your cage door ajar in summer, or in other seasons mockingly eluded my elusive broom. You who fix your Avertine eye indifferently upon me at all times, unlike real birds, who, if they regard me at all, regard me suspiciously or skeptically and keep their distance, as if they are tourists guarding their passports. You, in other words, little generic etched pewter bird on my desk, who should signify nothing at all to me, in fact, except from across the country, the news arrived not 8 hours ago yet, this windless December night, that my oldest friend in the world is dead, and there isn't anything she or I can do about that. And my heart, oh, my stunned heart on a scrupula of ribs is cold now as your weather-vane double, nameless, hollow, not hawk or sparrow. We're getting close here. I promise. This is the centerpiece of the book. I tell you this now. And the only thing that I would mention about this one, who shows up of all people, is Robert Bly. You know Robert Bly, yes. And before he got into that silly business with Iron John and the men's movement, in 1962, he was a great, I mean, he did a lot of great translations throughout his life, but the early ones, Silence in the Snowy Fields, I found that book just, it moved me quite a bit. And really, one of the earliest poetry books, I think, that meant something to me. And so, yeah, he shows up here while I'm doing other things. Robert Bly slips in here. So in 1977, when the tornado as hunger blows through bodies blue through the nearby cemetery, leaving on the chattering teeth of old wood gravestones and the naked carotene trunks of toppled elms. When it snatched up the adjacent Carmelite cloister and shook it, impaling two young postulants on shards of exploding rafters as they huddled in the chapel before heading further east to visit a nursing home and wreathe an infant in barbed wire. I was alone in a quiet basement library room in a college, reading Robert Bly's Silence in the Snowy Fields. I tell you this now, Tom, because you are dead. Because speaking to the flawed dead who are perfect now is easy. As I lean again tonight over your body and stare a long time into your eyes. All right. Good night. Yeah. Maybe I'll start one line up. Okay. I tell you this now because you are dead, Tom, because you are dead, because speaking to the flawed dead who are perfect now is easy. As I lean again tonight over your body and stare a long time into your eyes as through a train window, veiled with dust, until the words I read then, but never got the chance to say, come to me as a few simple wishes. That despite the anguish and crazy hungers that spiraled through your life, you too might have known the calm I knew that afternoon of iron mailbox handles and dark tire tracks in snow, and somehow understood the salvation of guinea hens hidden from the hired girl's hatchet in impossible places, asleep in the trees, even if that salvation was not yours. That if you trembled in your hospital bed, it was only the slight trembling of words on white pages opened on a table, like the trembling of grass or water deep in the wells. That is temporary. A wish that says, after the terrible whirlwind blew through, it was as if on a train, the conductor had poked you and you arrived out of the darkness, suddenly awake to a strange new city, utterly happy. In a couple, we're getting there, Tom, swear to God. All right. No. These are three poems. Shelley spoke of these. I guess I call them definition poems. They're sometimes a research into the etymology of a word and then where that kind of takes me. And the first one is called Once. And you'll see they follow kind of the same form. I think most of them. I'll read three of them. This one's called Once, and they're all short, I promise. Once, a beautiful gliding word, although perhaps less a word than an exhalation. Circa 1300, a simple adverbial generative, an F like S become CE affixed to the Middle English ane, meaning formally at one time. Nevertheless, its intent always complex, contextual, sometimes a little wince in there, a little ache, desire too, and wonder. Once we begin, our lips puckered as if for a kiss, but a kiss that never comes, breathless, forever in the past. And this one, in the same one, Eugene Meatyard isn't that the greatest name, Eugene Meatyard? I mean, he's from Kentucky, where I'm from. He's a photographer. He shows up in here, but the poem is in my worst fake German accent. It's called Freudenschreck. I feel like I have to say it that way too. Freudenschreck. Yeah. Freudenschreck, or intense pleasure fright. Leave it to the Germans to coin a word for the fleeting sense of being seized by such an inexplicable joy it verges on terror. Or maybe it's inexplicable terror pretending to be joy. Also a physical phenomenon. Neurologists say the amygdala glows red as a jackball, where their subject gaze at images of planetesimals or gallows. Picture a joyride, the Appalachian pin brides of Eugene Meatyard. Put yourself in the shoes of Ayanna Clemens, 44, of Peru, Indiana, a longtime congregant of the Last Days Christian Church, according to the Gazette, who may have had a seizure that caused her to shiver all over. Although another passerby reported hearing her shout, "Praise him," or "Praise God," before she sort of rocks him before casting that beautiful child into that cold river. Pleasure, fright, I suppose. And the last one of these is aglet, which I usually, when I have been doing these readings, I ask the audience, how many of you know what an aglet is? Did we do that already? Did you say what an aglet is? Oh, you're so good. Yeah, it is indeed. No. Indeed. It is a crossword puzzle word, isn't it? Yeah. It's kind of frightening if you do know what that word means. Yeah, aglet. So this is kind of the one of those where associatively I was thinking about what the word aglet meant, and then I thought of my father. So aglet, a bloodletting tool, a vestigial claw, liturgical vestment, a kind of stitch or stenographical notation, a vase, a fresh-born eel. It's fun now to imagine it could be any of these. But in 1967, the right answer was the little sheath at the end of a shoelace. Da's nightly vocabulary quiz, home from the Clifton cab yard, the summer before Sean and I would try for posh St. Tim's. Years ago now, but I can still see it, his pressed shirt and flocked cap, that pipe he claimed the mayor himself had given him. The two of us watching a drop of spittle trickle the length of its lacquered stem as he continued from the old French, aiguille, needle, to point or pierce, colloquially, a small sorrow. Video. And see what time it is. It's like, what have I got? 3 minutes, 3 minutes? No, goddamn, that's too long. So two short ones here. The first one is, you know how you sometimes see your name in a piece of graffiti or sometimes in a sign or something? It's kind of jarring. And so this one is about that experience. It's called Daniel. Daniel, my name, shared with many others, dead and living, a few famous, most not, yet with each of whom I feel an elusive but undeniable kinship. Meaningless in my mouth as it must be in the ears of my niece's pet rabbit. Stale bread on the lips of others. My twin, according to the ancients. For the romantics, the shadow with whom a man shares all his days. But is it I who look like you? Are you like me? And if you are like my constant shadow, why then, whenever we meet. Is it always if for the first time, Daniel? How is it? Even etched on this familiar park bench on 77th Street, set among overturned pink children's bikes and wildflowers, you somehow frighten me. And the last one is a return to my young life, and this one's called Childhood. A very short poem, you'll be glad to know. It is the thing that you may not know, and I didn't know really. The corpus callosum is that bundle of nerves and blood and viscera, I suppose, that connects the two hemispheres of the brain. Yeah. Childhood. Though childhood is not what a child would know to call it, or corpus callosum isn't quite connected yet. And anyway, why would she want to? When you're 6, you're a ghost inside another ghost, unpierceable by anything in the substantial world, where this and this and this keeps happening. A knob of milky quartz juts out of a rock. There's a man on the moon, a box of matches adorned with a key. You wear your life lightly, as the dog you name wears the name you name it. There you go. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you for your patience. My God, it's wonderful to listen to those poems. Now it's time. No. Hi, I'm Esther Weiner, also a longtime member. Why am I doing that? I don't have to do that. Longtime member of the Slappering Hall Press Advisory Committee, like Sally. Beautiful press representations of our chapbooks right there. And we are part of the Hudson Valley Writers Center, and we're very happy Margot's here. Because as Sally said, we wouldn't have a home if you were not with us. So thank you so much. I'm happy all of you are here too, but I'm particularly honored to be able to introduce Mr. Tom Sleigh. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about him. The first time I heard Tom read was with Phil Levine at DIA, New York City, 2002. Perhaps not too similar on the surface, but in fact, two infinitely serious, though never solemn poets. Their variant styles of wit, their threads of content, their care for each other. Tom's latest book, The King's Touch, is in fact in memory of Phil Levine and Mark Strand, certainly two contraries, both of whom also meant a great deal to me. I loved learning that Tom echoes my fascination with the actual meaning of the king's touch and the king's evil, and the ironic connection between the two. The king's touch refers to the belief that the king, as God's representative on earth, can lay hands on the sick and heal them. The King's Evil, which is a rather catchy title, I think, refers to the disease of scrofula that the king, in this instance, James VI, was supposed to cure with those hands. James also believed in witchcraft and the torturing of witches, even as he believed himself able to cure the sick, all the while repulsed by the ulcerated souls who believed in his powers too. I'm going to commit a sacrilege and only read you one stanza from this extraordinary poem called The King's Evil. The stanza is towards the very end of the poem. The king's evil and the king's touch are two faces of the king, who, when he touches the open raw sores of TB germs inflaming the lymph nodes and ulcerating the skin of his subjects, wonders for a moment if he isn't a demon, like the demons in his book, that he wants to banish from his kingdom, but they're everywhere you look. And the more you look, the more you find them, which is why the king's evil needs us, loves us, and wants us to be healed, so it can prove to the king just how sick his subjects are. Those spirits worth saving, if the saving can be done in a way that doesn't lead to demons entering our skin. As Tom does in this poem, as he always does, brilliantly juggling precision and mystery, I would also suggest that maybe a little more of the inexplicable is here and in this book, along with the contemporary. Here's just some of Tom's bio. Tom Sleigh is the author of 11 books of poetry, including winner of the 2023 Paterson Poetry Prize, The King's Touch, Graywolf Press 2022, House of Fact, House of Ruin, Graywolf 2018, Station Z, Graywolf 2015, and Army Cats, Graywolf 2011. His most recent book of essays, The Land Between Two Rivers, Writing in an Age of Refugees, Graywolf 2018, recounts his time as a journalist in the Middle East and Africa. He's been a Guggenheim Fellow, NEA grant recipient, and winner of numerous awards, including the Kingsley Tufts, Shelley Memorial Award from the Poetry Society of America, John Updike Award, and Academy Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. His poems appear in the New Yorker, the Atlantic, Threepenny Review, the Southern Review, Harvard Review, The Common, and many other magazines. He's a distinguished professor in the MFA program at Hunter College and lives in Brooklyn. He writes plays too, by the way, in his spare time. Tom would also like me to add to this bio. He's written a memoir about his mother's life, but from the perspective of her death. She took her own life 2 years ago. The book is called Rosie, and it's forthcoming from Unbound Editions. Well, the last time I heard Tom read was at the Irish Arts Center's annual Poetry Fest. He was so funny. He was so witty. And I thought of that wonderful Mark Twain quote, "Show me a man who knows what's funny, and I'll show you a man who knows what isn't." Tom Sleigh.
Well, like Danny said, it's all going to go down from here. But that's a great Mark Twain quote, and it's a lovely introduction. I deeply appreciate it. And Sally, that was terrific. Margot, thank you for making all this happen and making the space. And Sophia, thanks for, Sophia is a wonderful poet, and she has done so much to make this happen. And I have to say, she showed up in a room I was teaching in, and I called her my student, and she called me her teacher. But in fact, we both know really the equation is reversed. And I just want to say, Danny Lawless is, well, as you all saw how modest he is, but one of the things that I absolutely love about all of Danny's work is there was a quote that I was reading around and some T.S. Eliot, you know, the letters and whatnot, not the, you know, not when he was impersonating the dictator of London and all the rest of it. And he said at a certain point that that it's very hard to tell the truth and all the way to the bottom. And then he said, and the truth is a long way down. And I think that Danny tells the truth all the way to the bottom. So it's really a thrill and a delight to be here with him. And I'm going to embarrass him, you know, roundly until he blushes. Mission accomplished. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, then let me get my timer on here, because we all know the most important part of a reading is coming in on time. Because believe me, we've all been the ones where they haven't come in on. I remember this is in the latter half of Robert Bly's, you know, incarnation, when he was really full on Iron John. And I was reading in a bookstore in Los Angeles, which was actually run by Robert Pinsky's daughter. And so Iron John was selling a lot of books. And at a certain point, you know, maybe 15 minutes before the reading, I heard over the intercom, "Can we have another 10 copies of 10 Dick up here?" I thought, oh, okay, well, there you go. So anyway, I hope that came into the funny part. Okay, all right, okay. Anyway, I also want to thank Esta for, you know, that beautiful introduction. And also, if you don't know her book, This Insubstantial Pageant, you should get it. So anyway, and congratulations to Danny on his new book. Very happy to be able to read here with him. Now, can everybody hear me? Okay. Well, it is true. I remember that reading at DIA. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So, and Phil Levine died, well, died a bit ago, but, you know, he died in late April. So he's been much on my mind. And since you mentioned him, Esta, I'll read a poem. I'll start with a poem for Phil. And, you know, shortly before he died, he asked me to come out and see him because they'd known him for, oh, I don't know. He was the first poet I ever saw read. And I was 16 years old. And he was reading in a gymnasium at the University of California, San Diego. So I was sitting up in the gymnasium and I saw this guy come out, and he was wearing sneakers and jeans and a t-shirt. And I thought, I'm wearing sneakers, jeans, and a t-shirt. And then he read his poems, and I listened to them, and I said, oh, wow. He has sneakers, I have sneakers. He has jeans, I have jeans. He has a shirt, I have a t-shirt. How hard can it be? So, and then I would meet him years later. And then he became one of my closest friends. And as anybody who knew Phil knew, he was incredibly funny. And he went out the way he lived. I was, you know, went to see him. He only had a short time to live. He had invited me out. And, you know, as soon as I saw him, I came into his house in Fresno, and he said to me, you know, I said to Phil, because, you know, there's a lot of feeling going back and forth between us. And, you know, he was quite sick, but also totally Phil, completely irreverent. And I just, you know, said to him, you know, Phil, I really love you. And Phil said to me, I really love you, Tom. And Phil did not wear his heart on his sleeve. And, you know, unfortunately, I am more milky than that. And maybe a half hour later, I said, you know, Phil, I really love you. And Phil said to me with less enthusiasm this time, you know, Tom, I really love you too. And then another 40 minutes went by. And I start to say, it wells up in me. And I say, you know, Phil, and Phil says, Tom, stop. Let's not use that word. And so this poem is called That Word. And just so you know, Phil had a lifelong arrhythmia. Otherwise, you'll think the last line is poetry, and it isn't. It's just literal. He sits reading under his desk lamp. He loves how wind distresses tail and mane. He likes the rhymes internal and irregular, how people from the old days walk in and out of the poem, how the father who dies in one stanza can rise in another, how, despite the drought, the rain keeps falling in 14 lines. His rumpled bed is never not specific as the dent his head leaves in the pillow. He rubs his hand across his jaw, unshaven. His touch on the back of your wrist is delicate and urgent. When you help him up from bed, he isn't shy about holding on. When he lies back down, he grips his water bottle and won't let go. Smiling, says, let's not use that word. It's been used 10,876 times. He shrugs off the weepers, the brotherly lovers, the sour preachers turning purple and blue in their dandruff-sprinkled robes. Out in his backyard in Fresno, the oranges are ripening. At his window in Brooklyn, the plane trees, stripped bare of leaves, click softly in the breeze. Him in his undershirt, in his tweed jacket, in sweatpants, watching Norbert Szymanski clean and jerk. Now he's throwing rocks on the bridle path. He's turning into a fox. The brush of his tail mocks the pack. He leaps clear of his own tracks, doubles back, loses the lords and ladies riding. Now he's preaching to rats, showing them pages in holy books, money books, books of the entitled that are good to eat and chew right down. But all alone in his study with ice and sun, he scrawls with his fountain pen, crosses it all out, starts again. And this time, rising up, are the sheared away walls of an abandoned high school, a stack of rusted axles, a diner where nobody talks openly of love, but where ketchup and mockery are served up with the coffee, and his heart, arrhythmic, pulses out of sync, all on its own. Oh, okay. Well, he'll blame him. He's got his priorities right. You know, I think I'll make a hinge with Danny here. And actually start the, oh dear. maybe I should just keep talking so this moment can pass unnoticed. So there I was. Anyway, oh, that's okay. Yeah, no problem. I think I'm going to read a poem. Well, yeah, I make a hinge with Danny. Danny, you had your diagnosis, and I'll read a poem about similar experience. It's called The King's Touch, and it's after an MRI. And I assume everybody here you all look of a certain age, and you've all had them, correct? Yeah. And oh, a couple of youngsters, you haven't had them? Oh, lucky you. Well, they put you in this donut hole, and it sounds like there's a heavy metal band, but just the drummer, smashing away. The King's Touch. Up through shifting blues to where the sun is coolly ignorant of where I lie on the sea bottom, lit by my own stormlight flickering. I hear the tech's voice wrapped in space dark, scuttling through black light. Please don't move, Mr. Sleigh. All around me, the room is stammering, iron smashing against iron. A robot drummer pounding out the earth's magnetic field, slicing my brain into a geode's crystalline amethyst. Lying in my underwear, t-shirt, and holy socks, my head wedged to keep it still, I feel coming closer the king's hand. Poor squeamish king, cursed by the power to cure, having to touch all us sufferers with our ugly, swollen glands. But why shouldn't the king's touch cure me? Caught like an astronaut against the ocean's curve, lit by the sun rising, I can see the tech back on Earth, reflected in the metal halo hovering above my skull. Spinning crazily as dials on an old dynamo, my body's beyond control, outside of me, staring up at my own neuter attachments. In front of me, the whole Earth shines in its neural blaze. And the tumor in my brain goes on its own spacewalk, free to drift where gravity takes it. My tumor that, like a mother, talks to me in dreams, asking, Tom, do you have your suitcase? Did you remember your razor and your toothbrush? Have you packed your shoes? I think I'll read a poem from my ma. Yeah. My mother was a legendary high school teacher. And when I say legendary, I mean truly legendary. She had the most remarkable way of teaching grammar. I think I've told Esther this. It's an unforgettable sentence, and the sentence is simply perfectly calibrated to her students' anxieties. She would always begin every class in freshman year by saying and by quoting, Joseph Conrad, and she would have all these, young freshman high school students, and she would look at them. And she would be sitting in an overstuffed chair and a bathrobe, wearing fuzzy pink slippers. And everyone's like, oh my God, Mrs. Sleigh is really strange. And of course, she was famous, so everybody knew that that was what they were in for. And she just looked at them with a kind of gimlet eye and said, the purpose of this class is for you to immerse yourselves in the destructive element. And that certainly got their attention. So anyway, she grew up dirt poor. And she actually had a kind of Willa Cather upbringing because the first house she lived in was a sod house. And she, went first person in her county, male or female, to go to college, and she became this English teacher. But when she was in college, she discovered the classics and she loved them lifelong. And the night before Esther said she took her own life, she asked me to read to her from The Story of Civilization by Will and Ariel Durant. And she wanted me to, and so we just gotten to the part in the story of Civilization where Caesar is murdered and the Roman Republic falls. And the other thing she wanted me to read was she loved the Iliad. Most people love the Odyssey. She loved the Iliad. Anyway, the poem is a duet, and she has the first section. I have the second. She has the third. I have the last one. So she starts, she speaks. She called me on the phone often and say things like this. Tom, I'm all scrambled. Now, just who is Thetis? Is she the goddess of the shining thighs? Yesterday, I looked at my thighs, and believe me, they aren't shining. And Patroclus, he's Achilles' boyfriend, right? And he gets himself killed by wearing Achilles' armor. And poor old Hector, he has to stand up for his brother, what's his name, who stole Helen? Paris. That's it, Paris. Help me out here, will you? It's all a bit jumbly in my head. And Trump. Did you see what that pissant did today? And when she's half asleep, levitating up near the ceiling, who can stop the pen signing order after order that makes her words stumble? The committee in her right lobe scrambling every synapse fire, shorting out the wires between her will and brain, her heart beating softer and softer until it fades into tape hiss on the secret reel to reel. It doesn't seem right, Tom, that people should be 92. Do you think that's even possible? And this medical buzzer thing that goes off when I fall. When I was a girl, just who the hell thought that such a thing would ever exist? It's almost silly, isn't it, to live like this? You know that book that has the list of all the dead Greek warriors, not the big shots, but the nobodies, the one you told me about by that English girl? I like that phrase she repeats, and they bit the dust. You can see them as they fall. I like that. No buzzers for them, boy. No regret or fuss. And they bit the dust. Quicksand beneath her house shoes, surveillance satellites above. Among the old dead heroes, she founders on their love. She gave me the picture book where the god eats his child, then vomits him back up, where the mother holds her boy above the river of forgetfulness, clutching him by the heel not daring to get her fingers wet, immortal though she is. Just so, Ma, you dangle me head down, teaching me by example, immersion, subversion, in words that wear no armor and won't let me forget. Here's a different kind of war poem, in which a spider weaves a web on my computer screen. And I was writing a poem one day, a terrible poem, which is frequent. And I saw up in the corner of the screen this little commotion, and I didn't know what it was. And I looked closely, and there was the tiniest little red spider. And I junked the poem, and I said, I'm going to write about that. Poem's in two parts, and the second part takes a hard left, in which a spider weaves a web on my computer screen. And this experience comes out of the journalism that I've done over the last many years. And in this case, it was in Syria with Palestinian refugee. What is that shadow that weaves itself so fine across the edge of my computer screen? There it is, a pinprick of a spider weaving a web I'm looking through, as if it were a veil of second sight that, as I type these words behind the veil, the screen light shines right through. It weaves the sun into its web and turns the screen into a mirror, shooting back my own eyes, looking at the spider and wondering what the spider knows of me. Hello, pal, I want to say, but that feels unctuous, overly familiar for what I know I'm going to do. The web sways and ripples each time I breathe, getting ready to rip it away. There's a lot of casual brutality to reconcile. The spider clings to its web's outer rim, plucks with a slender leg a near invisible guy wire each time I type a word, and the silk trembles. Thank you. 2. He said that being a refugee was like living like a spider in the bottom of a well. He held his quiet dignity close to him. The others in the room stopped talking. I won't repeat exactly what he said. I won't repeat exactly what he said, since it's his to tell. But it had to do with how his mother died, how his home was destroyed. The words you use to talk about such things, the second they're uttered, sound suspect. For him to say, the soldiers shot my father, they blew up our house, and the worst thing I ever saw, the very worst, was seeing my baby brother crying on my dead mother's breast, as only my rendering in English what the translator, speaking in French, said he said. Raveled in words as a spider is raveled in its silk, I think I should know what to want to say, but to want to say is not what the man in his use of a figure of a spider drifting, suspended, tethered to a lifeline, spinning out impossibly fine, intends when he says, The deeds to my house are stained with blood. And then shows you the stains. 3 long stains, dried brown and fading above the signature line. And I'll read 2 more. Youth. I was doing an article about how soldiers cope with, the fear of death. And I was in a compound, and it was being, it was like every day at about 4:30, mortar fire would be coming in, and there were a couple of boys who I think were twin boys, and they were so used to it they just kept right on playing. Kind of like me and my twin brother. Smelling of sweet rosin, the Aleppo pines' shadows grow taller by the hour. 2 identical twin boys chase each other through the shadows, the one who's 10 minutes older yelling, "I'm gonna kill you," while the younger one laughs, "Kill me if you can." Day by day, these tea-time mortars keep pecking at the blast wall. But boys have grown so used to it, they keep on playing. If they weren't here in front of me, I'd find them hard to imagine, just as I sometimes find my own twin brother hard to imagine. I'm supposed to be doing a story on soldiers, what they do to keep from being frightened. But all I can think about is how Tim would chase me or I'd chase him, and we'd yell, "I'm gonna kill you," just like these brothers do, so alive in their bodies, just as Tim, who is so alive, will one day not be. Will it be me or him who first dies? But I came here to do a story on soldiers and how they keep watching out for death and manage to fight and die without going crazy. The boys squat down to look at ants climbing through corrugated bark, the wavering antennae tapping up and down the tree, reminding me of the soldier across the barracks, sitting still inside himself, listening to his nerves while his eyes peer out at something I can't say. When Achilles' immortal mother came to her grieving son, knowing he would soon die, and gave him his armor, and kept the worms from the wounds of his dead friend Patroclus, she, a goddess, knew she wouldn't be allowed to keep those same worms from her son's body. I know I'm not his father. He's not my son. But he looks so young enough to be my son. Sitting on his bunk, watching out for death, trying to fight and die without going crazy. He reaches for his rifle, breaks it down, dust cover, spring, bolt carrier with piston, wiping it all down with a rag and oil, cleaning it for the second time this hour, while shadows shifting through the pines bury him and the little boys and Tim and me, as I'm supposed to be doing a story in non-metaphorical, real life darkness. And this will be the last poem, and I want to, I'm in the midst sort of trying to put a new and selected together, and I discovered that all the poems I'm choosing have been published in Plume, which says that in fact, I tend to send Danny all of my best poems. So this is an older one. It's From the Ass's Mouth. I figured that would be me. And it's called A Theory of the Leisure Class. And at the end of Midsummer Night's Dream, I had forgotten, that all the aristocrats who were watching the peasants and mechanicals, as they're called, performing a little play, the ludicrous little play where Pyramus and Thisbe, is that they're making fun of them. So I was cast as bottom. Up on stage, in the 3/4 empty auditorium, the lights turned down. Up where the auditorium resounded to A Midsummer Night's Dream, performed clumsily by me, reading out Bottom's speech when he turns from an ass back into a human, while the rest of the class sniggered or flirted, sat back and chewed gum. The words in the auditorium lived out their hour. And after rehearsal, when I got on my bike, red bike, fat tires, to pedal home under cottonwood trees, I turned round corners I'd never seen in our tiny mountain town. Years and years went by. I was still pedaling. It wasn't a dream, except maybe in the way logic works in dreams. I had two heads now, my ass's head, my human head. My ass's bray more eloquent than my human bray of wonder at my change. The eye of man hath not heard, the ear of man hath not seen, my stumbling tongue piecing through Shakespeare's bitter oratory about no bottom to Bottom's dream. I put my bike in the carport and started throwing a tennis ball against the brick wall, thinking over and over, no bottom, no bottom. The harder I threw, the more the words weren't mine. The ball smashing brick, while there in the auditorium, the words were like a taunt, like Theseus's taunts spoken behind my back, because I was just an ass, not Duke of Athens. But after the play, the cast gave me the papier-mâché ass's head, and I kept it first in the room I shared with my two brothers, putting it on to sniff the dried glue, feel the claustrophobic fit, and stumble half blind to the bathroom mirror, where I looked out at myself through holes in the muzzle. The ass's painted on eyes and lips what people saw when they saw me. Shakespeare's words booming back from the head's suffocating hollows, coming straight from the ass's mouth, not mine. I don't remember how, but it ended in an alcove above the carport, where it softened on the chicken wire. The paper sagged and began to flake away, the muzzle and the eye holes shriveling into a gray, ulcerous mass. When we moved from that town, it got thrown into the trash, taken to the dump and burned. Onion eaters, garlic eaters, hard-handed men. That's what Bottom and the mechanicals were. And that's what I was, what I've always been, riding along on my bike's fat tires while that half-god, half-man Theseus laughs his courteous contempt of us, whose words come out like a tangled chain. Which is why there's no bottom, why there's never been a bottom, if you're just an ass who speaks prose to the Duke's verse, an ass who kissed the queen of the shadows and never got over it. My long, scratchy ears and hairy muzzle pressed to the ethereal, immortal, almost not there-ness of her skin. Thank you very much. Danny, we're going to talk. Thank you very much. Should we sit?
Pass it around. Here's what I'm trying to do.
Oh, so you want to sit?
Yeah, let's
Side by
make them
side.
a little bit closer to you guys so we can talk a bit more easily. Here's Jenny. And we can move that.
Just take this out of the way, yeah. Does this just come out?
It should come out.
Although it's
I don't want to ruin it. Oh, sure. I'm going to let Danny start.
They're gonna talk to you now.
I don't think so.
Whatever you wish.
usually you ask a question of each other first and that deal with you.
Okay, I'm happy to start. Since I have the mic, I can ask Danny and put him on the spot. So, Danny, I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about what French literature has meant to you as a writer, because I know that both of us have this deep love of Proust and all kinds of French literature, Marguerite Yourcenar and many other, right, the Goncourt brothers, I'm sure. So anyway, I just wonder if you could talk about that and how that, if it has, how it feeds into your poetry. I think I could say a few things about that when I hear your poems. To me, it feels as if there's a kind of ironist always at work in the same vein as somebody like Théophile Gautier. And yeah, or Jean Follin. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, can you hear? Yes. Can you hear me? Louder? Really? Okay. So we're good here? Yeah. Okay. French literature, particularly poetry, really saved me. My family life was kind of a wreck, as I said. And I remember very distinctly going to the Louisville Free Public Library. And Louisville was a town where the Binghams owned the Courier Journal and, you know, were philanthropists and all concerned with the arts. And they had left a French section in the Louisville Public Library of untrained books in French. And I would go and somehow taught myself French. You can get the lovely volume, French for Reading Knowledge. And so 16 or so, I'd cut school sometimes and go smoke cigarettes and in the library in those days with red carpet with lots of cigarette holes in the bottom. And you could just sit in the stacks and I would read and try to make sense of it, and particularly the surrealists. When I read them, I just thought my mind would explode at 16 and was just everything. When, you know, Benedict's early anthology. Yeah. And so, yes, very much that sort of, and if I wasn't reading in French, I was reading in translation, again, usually Benedict or somebody like that. And the translation seemed so flat, which pleased me to no end. I did not like the pyrotechnics and the rhyme, the internal rhyme. It was just very flat, like Nicanopala, you know, that sort of flat in translation, and I think that's what shows up in these poems, and in the distance from I mean, you can invoke the details, but that sort of step back and reserve and reticence, I suppose, I thought, at least, probably foolishly, but that's what I thought French poetry was about. And if I could tell anyone to read anything, it would be Jean Follin. Merwin translated him in Transparence of the World and The World Rich in Anniversaries, I think, yeah. But yeah, it does mean a lot, and mostly that notion of listing from Eliade but you can say anything if you just step back and don't get over emotional, I suppose. Yeah, yeah. That's it. Oh, I have
I can ask you another.
no. It's funny to me as I listen to you at 16, listening to Phil Levine and in the gymnasium, and I don't know much about your lifetime. I'm almost an autodidact. I mean, I did not go much to college here and there. I mean, I did get degrees, but it was kind of silly. It was sort of my master's was maybe 15 hours, 9 of which were thesis guidance. And my mentor was a novelist, so didn't really have much to tell me about poetry. I would just allude to these people that I mostly hadn't read, and I thought, oh, fine, okay, let them through. So I did essentially taught myself, and then went over to France and sort of did that. But I'm interested in how much your academic career impacted your own writing, and what you were reading early on that made you want to be, other than Levine, I suppose, and the t-shirts and the shoes and the jeans, and that, how hard could it be? Which you learned.
Which I learned.
It's much more difficult than that. But yeah, your academic career. And
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Well, I think we have this in common, Danny. I never got a BA. So I did manage to get an MA. But the only reason I got an MA was because I went to a place called Johns Hopkins University, and what happened is the guy who was running it, he basically when I was I dropped out of 3 colleges, and then and then I ended up at Johns Hopkins, and yeah. And then, it was, I was reading a lot on my own constantly. And I kind of I'll tell you the reason I read, we have very similar reasons, I think, for starting to read early is, there was a lot of noise, let me put it that way, in my household. A lot of very loud, angry noise. And so books, I'm sure you discovered this, was one of the few places that I could go to where I felt like I could have the voice on the page was intimate with me. And at the same time, it couldn't get too intimate because I could always close the book. And I think it was the first experience I ever had, really, of having a real relationship with something that just didn't overwhelm me constantly. And it became almost like a psychic necessity, because I could, while all the other stuff was going on around me in my household, that all the chaos of big emotion and whatnot. And there I was sitting in a corner reading my book. And it was very calming. And you lived a kind of parallel life. And at the same time, one of the people making the noise was, of course, my mother. And so, she was quite, in the same way that you've had personal experience or familial experience of people having shock treatment, whom you've known and been intimate with. Well, I had the same thing with my mother. she was an extraordinarily, she had a lot of charge, my mother. And I will never forget, and I think this was crucial for me, and I'd be curious to know about you in relationship to, the history that you've had with, your family members, is that I remember going into her bedroom once when I was about, I don't know, 8 years old. And she was at that time studying to get a degree in, she was teaching high school and she was studying to get a degree in American Studies. And she absolutely loved Thoreau. And so I came in, and it was always a strange experience to go into her bedroom, which was, it's always a strange experience to go into one's mother's bedroom. I mean, I don't know about you, but maybe I'm just a repressed, guy given when I was born. But, things went on there, which you heard, but you thought like, whoa, what is that? That is so weird, And then when you went in, because my mother was in a hurry most days, because, she got up early, she went out, she taught. And she was never, and I don't, this is not meant in any way as a knock on my mother. She just didn't, as I remember, she once said we had a wonderful conversation about it. She was a great, great friend, fabulous, best friend you could ever have. And she, we were coming, and she said, motherhood, it really left me at a loss. So anyway, there she was, and she saw me come in, and then she wore these wigs, which is what I was referring to as a haste. And she would put a new wig on each day, and each one was a different hairstyle. So there was a bouffant, and there was a this, and there was a that. And there the wigs were on their wig, they had styrofoam heads. And so there my mother was, and then there her like four, other selves were. And she began to read to me from the Ant War in Thoreau's Walden. And the Ant War is one of the most gruesome depictions of war. And it's also done with this kind of mock heroic flair, which is both hilarious and dreadful. And my mother was reading about, how the black ant was gnawing at the feeler of the red ant, even as the ants that were missing one leg and two legs. And of course, all this was, prior to the Civil War, but it was, that was all coming down. And she read it and she was transformed. She was a different person. And she was no longer mom. She'd moved firmly into the category of weirdo. And she had such intensity. And she was so transformed. And I said, I want to know what that is. I want to feel that. And so, took many years, but I'm sure that's what set me off. So how about you?
The Lawless household was silent. As my brother and sisters became ill, it became more and more silent. And those things weren't, there's a lot of avoiding of the gays, wanted not, because my siblings, physical manifestations were quite noticeable. So one got used to looking at the floor or beyond one brother or another or sister. And my parents didn't speak of it ever to us. It was, so I would find books and a kind of language and beauty that I'd never encountered. And I thought, this can help a little bit, I guess. And I never spoke to my parents about writing poetry. I think that I won some little $100 prize or something, and when I was young, and she was shocked that I had written a poem. And what are you gonna do with $100? Yeah, So it was very different from your loud family. Mine was, yeah, quite intentionally silent. But the book spoke to me in that language that, you know, that beautiful Tom Lux poem, the sound that you make when you read silently.
Yeah.
It was that.
Yeah.
It's just a gorgeous poem. If you haven't read it, it would read silently. Yeah, it's just a gorgeous, gorgeous poem. And yeah, that was it for me. Yeah, Tom Lux, whom we've lost to another. Yeah. So that was it for me. Anyone? Come on, you have something to say, Tom.
Well, I can ask Danny another, I can ask you another. Oh, well, okay.
No, go ahead.
Okay, all right. Well, one of the things that I was noticing today when you, I haven't read the new book, Mea Culpa, Mea Maxima Culpa, but I just got it today. But one of the things that I noticed when I read a couple of poems, particularly the poem, which totally caught me up short when I read it on the page in the Los Angeles Review of Books, was the fact that it was addressed to a Tom.
Yes.
That's what, like, that's okay. And I said, how did Danny know? I haven't died yet, but but if I do die, hopefully somebody will write a poem this good about me. And but one of the things that I noticed about is that there's this kind of mock ironic there's this kind of mock ironic very high style voice which keeps getting undercut and you know, flattened and brought down, but it modulates back and forth between something, you know, that I would associate with a kind of 19th century diction, you know, which I love, and then suddenly something super plain, you know, very, very, very just spoken, complete. Well, but I wanted you to talk.
High and low language, that collision works wonders, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And it has to be there. For me, I read poems that are all one or the other, and something, half the energy is gone. It really is the collision. And maybe from, I think more than anything was those initial images, those surrealist images were often about plain things, but in that kind of form, for me, formalized French.
Right.
Language, so that's probably where it began too. Is that for you in French, or did you understand that early on? I mean, nobody even taught you, did they, about high and low language? You just figured it out. Right?
No, nobody really taught anything about that.
No.
I mean, the teaching in those days was, you know,
Rudimentary.
well, yeah, you went into the workshop and you were sitting there thinking, I mean, back in those days, you know, let's just say the protocol was quite different. Well, yes, I can elaborate. I mean, I remember once I was in a classroom and the teacher, you know, they read a poem, he took the student's poem, he tore it in half, and he said, and now the poem is only half as bad. And I was just like, yeah, it was really something else. So, you know, you had to be, you know, yeah, there was no namby-pamby. I really like this poem, but you know, there was none of that stuff. You know what I mean? It was all just like, you know, pedal to the metal every minute. And I will never forget when I was teaching, I actually ended up teaching with Phil Levine at NYU. And Phil was of the old school. He wasn't mean, he was just funny. And, you know, and you had to have a sense of humor about yourself, or, you know, and in any case, a student who was a wonderful student, since gone on to publish books of poems with Princeton. Anyway, his name was Anthony, and Phil was talking about a poem in class, and the students really loved him. But you couldn't like be a, your sensitivity was not. Phil was interested in sensibility. He was not interested in sensitivity. You kept, presumably you could keep, figure out your own sensitivity. And I'm not like that. I am, like I say, rather milky and sort of, but Phil was like that. And so this is like the kind of teaching I'd be curious to know. No, ever, never. And so what happened was they were talking about a poem that was a sequence poem. And Phil began to say, well, the sequence has been set, and say, well, it's kind of, every time I repeat it doesn't do this, it's not doing that. And Anthony said, well, wait a second, Phil, wait a second. I mean, don't you see that every time that this phrase recurs in each part of the sequence, that it has a slightly different, a tone to it, and there's a way in which it's fitting differently into the structure of the poem. And Phil said, Anthony, put your hand on the table. And he said, put my hand on the table? And Anthony told me this story years later with great delight. And he said, put your hand on the table. And he said, he put his hand on the table, and Phil went, bang. And Anthony said, ow. And Phil said, all right, does it hurt worse on the first time or the 10th? So no, I did not have a mentor. Yeah, it was, you had to really want to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, mine weren't that, mine were more indifferent, I think, which is another form of that kind of, they were not touchy-feely, but I did know a poet named Ron Seitz, which I don't know who knows. Oh, Ron, who was big friends with Thomas Merton. And the Trappist Monastery is about 35 miles from Louisville. And I had a friend who had a brother there, a monk, and they allowed us to go to stay on their property on the week, maybe spend the weekend on the Trappist Monastery property on the condition, I'll get back to one side, but on the condition that we bring the abbot who detested Tom Merton because he was jealous. He wrote these didactic, horrifying little novels. The abbot did, and Merton was a world figure by that time. But the abbot would make us bring him, and we were 16, a 6-pack of Fall City beer and Jack Daniels. There was our payment for being able to stay at the monastery. But I learned quickly from reading Merton, and Ron Seitz introduced me to Merton. Merton died just before I probably would have met him in person, but Ron knew him quite well. But he turned my head towards that kind of spiritualist writing, and Ron Seitz was a real beat poet. So that kind of mixture of beat mysticism interested me too, and he liked my writing, and even showed a bit to Tom Merton. I thought, never heard back from him because he died in Thailand. So that was my mentor, was Ron, through, and a tiny little bit of Tom Merton, which I play in my mind is, he just loved that he was going to come back and talk to me about all these poems. But Ron was a good guy, and it was nice to have that. And he detested it. He also did not like academia, and although he was a teacher, and we just got to talk about it. I remember reading when Roland Barthes came out, and Derrida, and early in the early 80s probably. Yeah, exactly. And we would get to talk about those things, and I'd bring him books who I'd discovered, and it was all kind of new to us then. It was just a wonderful relationship. So I did have that. Nothing else in my master's program was all just really stupid, kind of silly. Let's say silly, useless. But Ron was a good helpmate to me.
That's great.
Yeah, that was good.
I mean, I had a similar when I got older and had actually, I think about the kind of bizarre luck that I've had, just in terms of the older poets that I know. And I think that that's one thing that I deeply miss. And it doesn't seem to me that there's as strong a connection between older writers and younger writers as there used to be. Or maybe I was just lucky. I don't know. Maybe it was just luck of the draw. But I published a first book and I was living in Boston. And this was the time in which, Robert Pinsky was there, Frank Bedart was there, Seamus Heaney was there, and Derek Walcott was there, and Joseph Brodsky was there, although he was, not as in the same, but everybody mixed it up together. Everybody went to each other's readings. There wasn't a sense of hierarchy that, everybody, you were put on immediate terms of equality, and that had its good parts and it had its bad parts, because nobody was going to treat you like a young person. And when they didn't treat you like a young person, it meant that they weren't going to bullshit you. And so there was very little bullshit. And of course, Phil was there, and Phil never bullshit anybody because he was incapable of it. But one of the things that I will always, remember was I had been at a place called the Fine Arts Work Center as a young writer. Anyway, Seamus Heaney began, and this was way before he was famous. He was just another Irish guy making a buck, at a university, and he knew Robert Fitzgerald. Robert Fitzgerald invited him to have this, position, temporary position. And so he started coming over to the United States, and then he got progressively more and more famous. But when I met him, he was not in the least bit famous. It sounds like name dropping, saying all those people, but actually none of them was really very well known in those days. And so the first time that I met Heaney was at the Fine Arts Work Center. You give a reading there. For some reason, afterward, and there was always much drinking and all that kind of carousing. And, some people would call it bad behavior. I would call it kind of interesting examples of human extremity. And he invited me back to his motel room where he was with staying with his pal David Hammond, who was a singer and also a guy who worked for the, RTE, the Irish version of the BBC. And so he invited me to come to see him in office hours at Harvard. Because, he just said, yeah, let's have lunch, come to office hours. Because he was on his own. Mari, his wife, was back in Ireland. And he was kind of loose ends, I mean, he was, he could go to the, I don't know, he could go to the Plow and the Stars and have a drink, but he was basically by himself, and he was looking for company because he was an amazingly social person. And he had, more than anyone I've ever known, a true gift for friendship. Very, very generous and kind. And also he had a backbone of steel. But I remember the very first time I went to see him, and then I'm going to hand it back to you. He's kind of my Ron Sykes figure, but I didn't really have somebody formative in my early days like that at all. I was sort of on my own along with the other students, but I will never forget coming in to see him in office hours. Kind of looked up at me with this, slightly conspiratorial air. And another guy had just gone out of the office, and he kind of narrowed his eyes and he said to me, "What do you know about him?" And I looked at him like, huh. And I could feel at that moment that, there was like a metal detector that I was passing through, And I've always thought of it as an METTLE.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I went through it, and you know, he was scanning me, and I had the same experience with Phil Levine,
Mm.
who basically put me through an interview of based on a Larkin poem, you know,
Yeah.
so, you know what I mean? I mean, it was, they were not gonna let you off, you know. So I passed through the metal detector, and then suddenly everything changed. Yeah. And being around him, he was the smartest. He made you feel smarter. He made you feel funnier.
And that's the mark.
And that's the mark of a really remarkable person. And, you know, I knew him for many, 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 many years, all the way up until his death. And that friendship and the things that I learned from him as a human being, as much as a poet, have always stuck with me. I will never forget. I love Derek Walcott deeply, but he was fucked up, Derek. He had a lot of flaws. No one who knew him would say otherwise. But I remember he was Seamus and he, a few years before Seamus died, they were up on a podium together at an AWP. And they were, Rosanna Warren was interviewing them. And at a certain point, you know, Derek was talking about, and I'd be curious after I'm going to finish this in a hurry. I'm sorry. But Derek was saying how since he won the Nobel Prize, you know, he really had to guard his time, and you know, it was you know, you had to watch out for fools, and do you suffer fools, that kind of thing. And Seamus, and then he turned to Seamus and he said to Seamus, "So Seamus, man, do you suffer fools, Seamus?" I think expecting him to say, "Well, no, Derek, I don't." But instead he said, "Well, Derek, I think it's your duty to suffer fools." And it was so beautiful. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
and, you know, and he was always like that, you know, he was always like that, you know, he had a tongue that could cut steel, you know, but, just, anyway.
I think this is forever.
Uh,
Millions
oh.
of fine books
Yeah,
and getting them signed. I think we should just say.
that's great. Okay, well,
Big, big, thank you. That was fantastic.
thank you.
Yes.
I've never heard a more interesting conversation at anything like this, and I really thank you for, you know, talking about your families in that way, and fascinating, and an honor to hear.
Thank you.
Very soon. Thank you.
Now,
For your picture.